Can a town in the middle of the desert really be one of Oregon's fastest growing places? An outdoor enthusiast paradise in summer and a bustling ski town in winter, Bend, Oregon is truly an oasis in the heart of the desert.
Throughout history, a select few places have experienced massive population growth in a remarkably short amount of time. These are the boomtowns.
Individuals with vision and guts put it all on the line to build infrastructure and a better way of life for these communities, changing the local economy and history forever. We are on a mission to find the next boomtowns across America. Located 3 hours southeast of Portland at the base of the Cascade Mountains in the central Oregon desert is a town called Bend, which grew by 3% last year. Now, that may sound a bit conservative, but the population has almost doubled in the last 10 years and it shows no signs of stopping. The history of this town can tell a lot about its growth potential, so Hunter, you are our resident armchair historian. What is the history of Bend?
Yeah, so let's take a step back, way back into American history to pre European contact. So, the area in central Oregon along the Deschutes River, it was used by the Native Americans for hunting and fishing. And it wasn't until 1824 that non-natives visited the area for the first time. It was actually a group of fur trappers that were passing through while they were looking for beaver. Not a lot else happened in the area, honestly, for the rest of the 1800s. Just some pioneers passing through on their westward journey. But what was interesting was these pioneers would use the expression as they crossed the river, "Farewell Bend." That's what they would say, "Farewell Bend." And in time, this expression stuck, and the frontier town that existed there became known as Farewell Bend. Now, of course, at that time, the town was really just a lodge, nothing else. I think there was a ranch there as well. But then in 1901, everything changed. The first sawmill was constructed at Farewell Bend. And then in 1903, a second sawmill was constructed. The logging industry had arrived, and with it came job opportunity and employment. So by 1904, a community had developed around this town and these mills of about 300 people. They took a vote and decided to officially incorporate the town of Farewell Bend. Soon afterward, the US Postal Service decided that the name was too long, very big government of them, and they decided to drop the farewell portion. Thus, Bend, Oregon was born. Now, over the last 100 years, Bend has evolved from a mill town to really a tourist destination, a vacation destination. All over the Pacific Northwest, people travel to Bend for the scenic views, the riverside beauty, the ponderosa pine trees. But what we have seen here in recent years is a shift. People are now trading in their vacation homes for permanent residence. People are making Bend, Oregon their forever home.
And it is growing like crazy. So the total population of Bend is 102,059 people as of not today, but recently. And the growth rate is about 3%. But I want to mention, wait to the end of the episode because I did some math and I figured out what the projected growth rate will be for 2023 and also for the next 15 years. And it's pretty astonishing. So worth hanging around for. And the age demographic in Bend are close to the national average. So 38.4 years of age versus 37.4 throughout the US. The gender demographics, it's 52% male, 48% female. And that's close to the national average as well, a little bit more male dominated there. And Bend is an outdoor enthusiast paradise, but as you just mentioned, Hunter, it's really become this hot spot to raise a family. And so I think we're going to see that more in the statistics as we go along. But the final thing I want to mention is on the political spectrum, Bend is more liberal leaning than average throughout America, but it is quite a bit more conservative than, let's say, Portland, Oregon. And so that's something to bear in mind with the political spectrum there. All right. So as we do here on Boomtowns, we have three main categories when we look at a booming place, right? We look at visiting it, moving there, and investing there. So let's hit the visiting part first. So there's a few things I want to share about kind of the highlights of visiting Bend. If you're looking to vacation in Bend, you should listen up. All right. Here are the top 5 things to do. First is the Deschutes River. This runs straight through town. It's like super famous. There's a brewing company named after it. Mount Bachelor Ski Resort, which is absolutely fantastic, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. The Old Mill District is super cool for movies, shopping. They have a bunch of high-end boutiques. They have some food there as well. And Bend really has killer restaurants in general and awesome food trucks. The food scene is maybe top 10 in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know. It's really good. There's also Tamulo Falls, which has an 89-foot drop. This is a picturesque waterfall, so definitely worth a look there. The amount of tourists per year that go to Bend are 7.25 million. So this is important to note that yes, there's a bunch of people that live in Bend, but it is also a tourism town. And the best season to visit Bend, now, this is really unique. Bend is an extremely four-season climate. It is very distinct in that way. And so, honestly, I think year-round it's worth visiting Bend. Every season has a different thing to do. And in terms of where you could stay, the nice thing about Bend is, again, it has affordable places because residents live there, so families coming, it's no problem. But they have a lot of infrastructure for the hospitality industry. So whether you want to stay in an Airbnb, whether you want to stay in a hotel, whether you want to camp, there's a bunch of different options in Bend and the surrounding areas around Bend. And finally, the best restaurants in Bend. So I'm going to list a few here, and I have some personal experiences on this as well. So the first is the Zydeco Kitchen and Cocktail Bar. Also, Five Fusion Sushi. You should definitely check that out. The Blacksmith Restaurant. That is like true old West steakhouse vibes. And they just have awesome food trucks as well. So, one food truck tip, because there are a ton of options in Bend, I highly suggest a food truck called A Broken Angel. It's a fully sustainably sourced food truck, and they have this, I believe, foraged mushroom biscuits and gravy recipe that it's mind blowing, and it's also massive. My wife and I shared it, so definitely check out A Broken Angel. So yeah, Hunter, when it comes to vacationing and visiting to Bend, I know you've been there, so give us a scoop.
Yeah, Bend is a really cool place. I've been there a few times. My wife, who grew up in the Pacific Northwest, she went there every summer for family vacation, as do a lot of people around here. What what you touched on about the Four Seasons thing is so true. Anyone who's familiar with the Pacific Northwest knows that it rains a lot here. I live in the greater Seattle area, and I can assure you it does, in fact, rain a lot here. And what's interesting, though, is when you cross the Cascade Mountains into eastern Washington or eastern Oregon, it's very desertous, very dry, very hot and sunny. And what's unique about Bend is it's not either of those things. It's really the only place in the Northwest where you do have the 4 seasons, where you have green trees, but not a lot of rain, where you have snow in the summer, but it's or excuse me, snow in the winter, but it's beautiful in the summer. And because of that, it attracts people for various reasons. If you wanna go hiking when it's nice and beautiful outside in the summertime, you can do that. If you wanna go skiing in the winter, you can do that too. The fall is beautiful, the spring is nice, go floating down the river in the spring, sounds amazing. So, yeah, Bend is just a really unique place. Another thing I like about Bend, as you touched on Austin earlier, is it does kinda have a, outdoor enthusiast vibe, but it also is very family friendly. And it's surrounded by a lot of rural areas, and it kinda has almost like a Wild West vibe. You don't have to go far outside of town to see pastures and just things that evoke the imagination, old Western scenery, cowboys, that sort of thing. So for me, I feel like it has something for everybody. It's not, you know, just one particular thing that you may be looking for. You can do whatever you want there, and it attracts people from all over that have various interests. If outdoor stuff is not your thing, like you said, the restaurants are awesome, the breweries are awesome. So again, it really is just a little something for everybody.
Yeah, I entirely agree. And you know, you if you want to visit Bend, I would say think about the season that you're going, as you mentioned, Hunter. One, you want to plan ahead. You'll want to get those ski passes, or you'll want to figure out those hiking trails. You want to get your room way in advance because there's a huge amount of demand, particularly in the peak seasons, which is like summer and winter, essentially. But what's interesting about Bend from a tourism perspective, and I've been a few times, my wife and I went there on our anniversary as well. That was the last time we went, is that although there is actually a lot of tourism traffic, it's pretty chill. I think it's because it's spread out a good bit and there's a lot of things to do in a bunch of different places. It's not like going to New York City and everybody's in downtown Times Square, right? Like there's hotels all over the place. There's actually like a resort town called Sun River, which is a totally separate place that families tend to go, and that's nearby. And so I think it's one of those places that if you want to go and whitewater raft and hike, you got it. If you want to go shopping at the high end boutiques and hit up fancy restaurants, you got it. And then if you just want to sit in your room with the view of the river and read a book and then go for a walk on the town at 8 p.m., it's pretty calm, actually. So, yeah, it's just a fantastic place to be. And I remember, Hunter, you and I were chatting before this episode about what is Bend like that other people would kind of understand the concept of. And the thing that we both came up with was like Lake Tahoe might be the best analogy. So, all right. So we'll go into at the end whether we would suggest vacationing and visiting there and what we would personally do. But let's move on to the move there section. You know, this is a big deal, right? When you're considering moving, it's a high risk endeavor. You want to make sure you're going to enjoy it, your family's going to enjoy it, you're going to be able to afford it. So let's go into some of the statistics there. And we're going to discuss what the day to day is going to be like moving there, as well as a little bit of the weekend lifestyle. So, first, I'll hit you on the tax rank. The state of Oregon is ranked 25th out of 50, number one being the most expensive, number 50 being the cheapest. So, it's right in the middle. And I. Every state has its pros and cons on taxes. I would say Oregon's income taxes tend to be higher, but the thing that Oregon doesn't have is sales tax. So, from a tourism perspective, you get to buy a bunch of stuff. And when you live there, it's great because, yeah, just whatever supplies you might need. No sales tax is awesome. And Hunter and I both live in Washington State, and we have lived in areas close to the state of Oregon where you essentially can get the benefits of no income tax in Washington and no sales tax in Oregon. So Oregon is awesome in that regard. Some of the biggest employers in Bend are really around the hospitality and tourism industry. And there's also a growing contingent of remote workers. Bend has become this huge hub for remote work because they have good infrastructure. It's beautiful and it's not too far from a big city. But the major employers that you would work at in person would be St. Charles Health System, which is the big hospital there. AE Solar Alternative Energies, big solar company there because they get a ton of sun. And then the city of Bend, the government there as well. The unemployment rate is at 6%, which is the national average, the blended national average. So nothing crazy there. Now the average home cost is $755,500 as of today from Redfin Analytics. So we'll get into that in a little bit more detail, but don't let that number scare you necessarily. Just be aware it is what it is. And finally, I want to mention for families out there the school ratings. So Bend has exceptional schools. They have multiple elementary, middle, and high schools, and they range from 7, 8, and 9 out of 10 on the rating scale, but most of them are 8s or 9s. So their schooling is just awesome. So, Hunter, I want to talk to you a little bit about your experience traveling there and just what do you think it would be like to live there?
Yeah, well, the thing that sticks out to me the most is the schools. Oregon as a whole doesn't have the greatest schools, if I'm being honest. And the fact that we have schools in Bend that are 7, 8s, and 9s is just unbelievable. Um, so that's great if you have kids, if you have a family looking to start a family, that's a big bonus. Um, and you're right about the taxes. Living in Oregon, hey, that That's good, and especially in Bend, where there's a lot of places to shop, a lot of places to spend money, well, there's a little bonus for you. And
Yeah,
you're
for
totally
sure.
yeah, and another thing that you mentioned, that I wanted to point out was the employment. Up until very recently, if you wanted to live and work in Bend, tourism, hospitality, that's about it. But as we've seen this shift over the last couple years of more and more companies going fully remote, that's opening up huge opportunities for people to be able to move to places like Bend, and we've seen that. I know you and I both know people personally who have moved from like the Portland area to Bend because they're working remotely now, and that's something that just a couple of years ago was just not an option because people don't want to commute 2 hours, 3 hours. Um, to their job, and now, hey, we're able
Yeah,
to, and I think that's great.
yeah, definitely. And something came to mind when I was thinking about moving there. You were talking to Hunter, and I think every place when you consider moving there, you really need to think about what lifestyle do you want to live, and what lifestyle do you want your family to live if your family is moving there. And there's something very unique about Bend, which I'll get to. So first, I'll say day to day life in Bend will feel very normal. I would say, in the sense of they have a ton of infrastructure. Um, Pretty much anything you could want is there. I uh, except for the understanding that there is tourism there. So during certain seasons, traffic will be worse. It'll be a little bit busier. But having lived in some of those places, I lived in Hawaii, for example, you just, you know when that is and you just plan accordingly. So I would say out of the tourist oriented places, Bend's infrastructure is quite good for that. And then as a local living there, you get to have all of the awesome weekend things that the tourists pay a lot of money to come and do. They're
Mhm.
literally out of your back door. And so it really is extremely unique in that capacity there. But I do want to mention on the inverse of that, just so we're objective on this podcast, uh, Ben's pretty remote. So it's like 2.5 to 3 hours from Portland. You end up having to go over Mount Hood, which in the winter can be rough. They do a pretty good job of keeping it up because they have ski resorts up there. But I mean, there's snow and ice for sure. Um, and the big international airports in Portland. So if you're working in Bend and you travel a lot, just be very aware that that's a solid 3 hour commute to get to the airport as well. Any other thoughts on the living there before we move on to the investing?
No, I think I'm good, Austin, I appreciate it.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So the third category, we just hit visit, we just hit move. Now we're going to move on to invest. And I find this particularly interesting. So let me hit you with some stats. Again, the population is growing by 3%, but I'll get into the projected growth rates at the end. So stick around to the end because you'll notice that the 15-year growth rate is actually pretty enormous. And I will say that in the last 10 years, the population of Bend has literally doubled. The median income there is $60,563, which is above the national average, and the average family income is $72,870, which is slightly higher than the national average as well. I will say that number is probably skewed a bit because there are a lot of single folks who also live in Bend due to the adventure outdoorsy nature of it, and so I would anticipate that families working and living there are probably all over the spectrum in that regard. Um, the percent of home ownership is 59.6%, almost 60%. This is way above the national average. And I found that stat extremely interesting. And I'll just speak to that really quickly. The reason I think that probably is because renting in Bend is expensive. So it is generally a logical choice to buy a home. But you heard earlier that the average home cost is $755,000. Um, and another stipulation, there are a lot of $1 million beautiful mansions in Bend. So that probably pushes that average up. But I bet you if we went on Zillow or Redfin today and we looked up a 4 bedroom, 2 bath home or 3 bedroom, 2 bath home in Bend, I think you'd be hard pressed to probably find one under 500,000 if I was guessing. So just something to bear in mind there. But the point with this is a lot of people live in Bend and home ownership is high. They have a good amount of income. And Bend really has that perfect blend of middle class income earners that are living there, building their lives there, spending money there, but also tourism supporting the local economy and the hospitality industry. So it really is this dual investment opportunity there. And honestly, Bend even has two Costco's. So there's like, Costco doesn't go places where there's not demand, really. And so I think that alludes to how much demand there really is there. So, Hunter, any thoughts on the investing landscape and kind of what you think in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, you said it with the Costcos, man. One town with 2 Costcos. Most towns don't have a Costco, so that's a big deal. And listen, there would not be as many restaurants and breweries in that town as there are if it was not a good place to invest and make money. Period.
For sure, for sure. And I've been doing some thinking about uh, whenever we find these boom towns, right? Hunter, you know this about me, but I'm always looking for opportunity. And I look at Bend and I think, okay, where are the untapped opportunities in the Bend area? If I was to invest my money today, where would I do that? Yeah, you have real estate, short term, long term rentals for the tourism industry is a big deal. I will tell you, their Airbnb laws are pretty specific. So bear in mind if you're a short term rental investor, just dig into that a little bit. You can always talk to a real estate agent there. Uh, the restaurant and food truck scene is maybe a little saturated. Would you agree?
I would agree. Yes, there is a lot, which is great if you are a consumer, but maybe not great if you are providing the service.
Yeah, totally. And I have heard that food truck spots are actually a little bit tricky to get there. And so, again, huge opportunity there if you can stand out from the crowd. But I might not do that as of today. But one of the things that became very clear to me was Ben has hospitality, hotels, short-term rental market. They need services electrical, plumbing, business services. Then you have all the people moving there. They're building a bunch of homes in Bend and the surrounding area. Those homes are expensive. Those homes are relatively big and nice. They need electricians and plumbers and solar installers. And so the fact that a solar company is one of the largest employers there doesn't surprise me at all. I think there's a huge investment opportunity in the services industry there. So, just a little bit of a tip for anybody listening to the podcast. If you're interested in investing there, go check it out and look into the opportunities.
And
So,
one thing
Hunter,
I
I'm going
would
to hand it over to you.
Oh,
Oh, go
sorry.
ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say one last thing on the investment side, that I'd like to point out is, again, Bend is 4 seasons, and the primary tourist seasons are summer and winter. A lot of tourist towns, whether it be a beach town or a mountain town, they get the majority of their people coming through 1 season a year. Well, with it being 2 seasons a year, that's double the amount of opportunity.
Yes. Great point. Not to go too off track here, but my sister in law lives in Alaska and she met this woman who runs a whale watching tour company in actually Hawaii, but she's opening one up in Alaska because the whales migrate, right? So the seasons are inverse. And so she basically gets to make a ton of money twice a year. And then in her case, I think she just takes the rest of the year off, which is awesome. So um a similar concept with what you said there, except that you don't have to travel between Alaska and Hawaii. You can just stay in Bend all year, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, dude, I'm going to hand it over to you because, we want this to be as objective as possible for anybody considering visiting, moving, or investing in Bend. So, Hunter, hit us with some things that people have to say about the area who've been there.
Sure, yeah, we've got a couple reviews here that we pulled from online, and I'll read this one first. I've lived in Bend for 10 years now. I'm originally from a poorer town in California with the same population as Bend. Here are my pros and cons of living in Bend. Start with the pros. Bend is a beautiful and clean city compared to cities of smaller size. There are plenty of outdoor and indoor activities during all 4 seasons: hiking, skiing, bike trails, beer festivals, concerts, great pubs and restaurants, walking trails, etc. Bend is large enough to contain most stores, services, and amenities that you'll need on a daily basis. Bend's growth has increased job opportunities. Each section of the city provides local residents with unique stores, restaurants, etc. You rarely need to travel across town to purchase something. There are a variety of ages in Bend. It's a good place to raise a family from a statistical data standpoint. All 4 seasons are mild and close to equal in duration. There is plenty of sunshine during the winter. Okay, that was the pros, and that was a lot of the things that we hit on, Austin. But let's hit the cons. What does this guy have to say? There's been a dramatic influx of people from San Francisco, Los Angeles, Portland, and Seattle, which has changed Bend's culture, the housing prices, political toleration, traffic, and interpersonal manners for the worse, in this person's opinion, as follows. Ben's culture changed from down to earth and pleasant to frequently shallow, vain, obnoxious, and rude. And the rent and housing prices have tripled. Do we want to pause and talk about this comment before we move on to the
Whew.
next review?
Yeah, I think we should. Yeah, yeah, because um, you know, eh, this I think is a very important and objective review in the sense of this person comes from a particular background and they want a certain thing, and I think they very clearly communicated exactly what we think on the pros, and then I can see their perspective on um, the cons. As Bend has just grown like crazy, places like that change, and some people don't like that change, and so that's kind of the vibe I'm getting. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, first of all, when you move to a town that has a tourist industry, you should expect that going in. And any town that grows substantially over a short amount of time, you are going to get culture shifts, especially people coming from other cities or from out of state. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Um, it brings with it infrastructure as well. And so if it wasn't for all these people coming in, you may not have the amenities that you enjoy. So I totally understand where the guy's coming from, because there is definitely something to, you know, old school, small town mentalities. But I mean, there's a flip side as well. If you live in a small town, you're not going to have as much infrastructure. You're not going to have as much diversity. So you got to look at it, as both pros and cons. So there is good
Yeah,
with the
for
bad.
sure. Definitely. Definitely.
All right, I'll go ahead and jump into the second review here. This is from a different person. I have visited Bend for many years and moved here last year with my family. Every person that complains about Bend does not understand how economics work. The main gripe people have about Bend is that housing is more expensive than it used to be. Will ever look for housing in Vail, Park City, Oceanside, California, or Lake Tahoe? Highly desirable places are more expensive. Get used to it. Bend is expensive because of its proximity to Mount Bachelor, the best mountain in the Northwest. It's in the high desert, gets tons of sun, but doesn't look like a desert. There are rivers and hills and pine trees everywhere. Bend has a very outdoorsy vibe, kind of like the REI store in real life. It feels like everyone here hikes, bikes, skis, and runs. The city is clean. The people are much more laid back than in bigger cities like Portland. Can't afford to live 30 minutes from the mountain? Move to Redmond, 20 minutes away, or La Pine, 25 minutes away, or Madras, or Metolius, very cheap. People with lower incomes always commute longer if their job is in a desirable area. The city used to be filled with sports enthusiasts and retirees, but then it was discovered. People love it here. They tell their friends. Yes, many have moved here from California, but people move from all over the place all the time. Most people move for work. People move to Bend for a better lifestyle. Like us, many have moved here to raise their kids in a safe environment. Bend and Central Oregon will continue to grow exponentially as long as the bigger cities like Portland Metro and Salem experience record crime and homelessness. I like this review because while it did touch on some of the negatives, it really spun everything in a positive light. And he's got a point. Other places like Portland are growing. They're seeing more crime, maybe some of the things that you don't want to tolerate. Well, hey, move to Bend. It's super safe. It's super clean, and it's got everything you need.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, and again, I think this is the perspective on things. Um, yeah, if you grew up in a town and it's changed and housing prices have tripled and everything. Oh, and by the way, your kids aren't in school anymore. Like that sucks. But if you're coming from a place where the crime rate's super high and it's even more expensive to live there, I love the analogy that they drew to um, Tahoe, and where else were they saying? San Francisco,
Park City.
Park City. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is probably quite analogous with Bend, actually, from a Four Seasons perspective and everything as well. I Yeah, those places aren't super cheap either, but I will say, and genuinely, since we've been there, Bend is not, it is not cheap if you are looking to live somewhere and move somewhere to save money from where you're living today. Most people consider the suburbs of Bend. I would say the other towns surrounding Bend, as this review mentioned, probably makes more sense. But if you're looking to go from a big city that's kind of expensive to a bit more affordable place where you can build a lifestyle, buy a home, have all the amenities, I think Bend makes a bunch of sense. So I liked the juxtaposition of these two reviews, showing both perspectives. Okay, now the moment of truth. I did some math and I was curious to see what the projected growth rate of Bend would be for 2023, but also what the projected growth rate will be in 15 years. Um, I did 5 years and 10 years and 15 years and 20 years. I did a bunch of math, but the 15-year one was really interesting. So essentially, by 2023, I'm projecting that the growth rate will grow by 2.6%. Which is a little less than the 3%, but the economy is slowing. And as economy slows, tourism will slow. And as tourism slows, I've noticed with Bend that people who vacation in Bend, a certain percentage of them just move to Bend because it's awesome. So that will probably decrease the population growth rate for 2023. But according to the math that I've done, even at that rate, within 15 years, I do think demand will continue, and the population should get close to doubling in Bend within another 15 years, which is still only about 200,000 people. So bear in mind, this is not a huge city. This is um, a very sustainable kind of situation there. Um, so, Hunter, I got to ask you, as we conclude every episode, I got three major questions for you. Would you visit, move, or invest in Bend?
Yes. Excellent questions, Austin. Would I visit Bend? 100%. I've been there. I want to go back. It's a great place. Would I move there? I'm gonna give that one a hard maybe because I think it's circumstantial. If I had a work from home job and I had a little bit of money to spend, absolutely, I'd move there. But if that's not in the cards right now, maybe not. And then would I invest there? Absolutely. I think it would make be smart to invest there because as we said, it's growing, it's dual season, it just makes sense.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And on my end, I would totally visit there. We do visit there. It's awesome. And different seasons, if you are in the area, if you're in the Pacific Northwest and you want to visit there and you fall in love with it in one season, go another season. There's a ton of cool stuff to do every season. If you only are ever going to go once, if you like skiing, go in the winter. If you like hiking stuff, go in the late spring, early fall. It can get a little hot in the summer, but go in the summer too. There's a ton of stuff to do and a bunch of water. Would I move there? Probably not, simply because it's like 2.5 to 3 hours to an international airport. I do travel a lot for work. Um, and I even thought about, would I retire there? And that's closer to a yes for me. But again, I'm not sure my family, it's not super convenient for family to come and see me or for me to go and see family. Everything is a considerable road trip. So in my particular scenario, probably wouldn't move there, but I would definitely invest there. I think there's huge opportunity in Bend. It's going to continue to grow. And it really is within the top 10 of these four season spots like Tahoe, like Park City, Utah, like Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And if you haven't checked out Bend, you totally should. So I just want to say thank you so much for listening to Boomtowns. And don't forget to tune in next week as we discuss one of the fastest growing towns in Idaho.
They're not just famous for their potatoes.